I am New York.
Ya som New York.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
We are New York.
Welcome to DiverseCITY, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Bronx. This month, we're actually going to take a look back at some of our favorite stories from the past calendar year. 2022 has been a transition period for many of us. Train stations are bustling again, parks are a haven for a quick coffee, and wearing a mask has become optional. All that now that President Biden and other leaders have declared that the COVID-19 virus that started the pandemic is now endemic. Our producers went back onto the streets for in-person interviews to explore how many New Yorkers were dealing with the new normal. From our coverage of local politics to uncovering the unusual history of some of the areas that we visited, our team found that the issues in many of the neighborhoods in the beautiful mosaic were as colorful as ever. We'll get to those stories right after this. We'll begin with politics and the perennially problematic process of redistricting. The practice of redrawing federal and local voting district lines after the census was making headlines and head spin this past year. Politicians wrangled over how best to maintain their power and were roiled when they lost their seats. One of the groups trying to plant its feet on what was quickly shifting political sand was South Asians in Ozone Park. Shannon Ayala reported on how the power struggle in Albany affected that Queens community.
So just sign at the top for me, please.
Richard David is a district leader for Assembly District 31. The district stretches from South Ozone Park to neighborhoods on the other side of JFK Airport. He says District 31 is a case study on how the new state district map dilutes the South Asian community's political power.
It rips this community apart at the heart.
David is one of the estimated 140,000 Guyanese immigrants in Queens. These South Americans are the second largest immigrant group in the borough. Guyanese trace their roots to India and Africa. Indo-Guyanese are a big part of the growing South Asian presence along a stretch of Liberty Avenue.
And so the center of this community and the busiest commercial district is where we are now on Liberty Avenue. People come from Trinidad, Guyana, Canada, Florida, and they come to Liberty Avenue because this is Little Guyana.
Little Guyana is just one of the South Asian enclaves that continues to be fragmented ever since Governor Hochul signed off on new state and congressional maps in February. Though a New York Court of Appeals tossed the congressional and state Senate maps in late April, the Assembly maps were unaffected for the time being.
That community of interest was divided into 7 different Assembly districts. It's hard to understand how that could possibly be and how it just continues from cycle after cycle.
Jerry Vadamala is an attorney with the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. It's part of a coalition of legal groups that advocate for communities of color to have these maps redrawn. That's a process called redistricting.
Essentially, what it comes down to is you're asking legislators oftentimes to do something that's not in their best interest, and the only way they'll do that is if they're forced to do it legally, and many times they're not, and then all you have is public pressure.
The coalition has built public pressure in the past by working with local communities to create a lobbying device called Unity Maps. Vadamala says these maps are not official government documents, but they have influenced previous redistricting efforts. He points to the election of Congresswoman Grace Meng and State Senator John Liu as wins that resulted from Unity Maps.
If you look at New York City, the only way the Asian American community was able to elect candidates of their choice is when they had a fair redistricting map.
The districting process happens every 10 years following new census data. But the pandemic and other issues made collecting that data harder this time around.
People had to go into it blind. So when they had hearings over the summer, nobody had census data to go off of, right? And we never really experienced that before.
David was recently in Little Guyana getting signatures to be on the ballot for re-election to district leader. He ran for city council in 2017, but lost to Adrienne Adams, who's now council speaker.
And so I got involved because I believe that this community deserves good representation and powerful representation that's local, that's organic, that understands the issues that homeowners and tenants and everyone here feels.
It's worth noting that despite the fragmentation in South Queens, Jennifer Rajkumar was elected to State Assembly District 38 in 2020. She only had a small percentage of South Asian voters in her district that includes Ozone Park and Richmond Hill and stretches across Woodhaven, Ridgewood, and Glendale. She said she galvanized the South Asian vote. Shannon Ayala for DiverseCITY.
We headed up to the Bronx for this next piece, to the seaside settlement, City Island. There's an effort afoot to raise awareness about how rising sea levels could forever change that coastal community. Once thought of as just a rare occurrence, there are concerns that the sunny day flooding on the island is only going to get worse. It's quiet today along the coast of City Island, but these calm waters can become very aggressive quite quickly.
We can, like on a regular tide, we can see the water just up to the wall.
Right.
In a moon tide, it'll be a little bit higher, maybe 2 feet, 3 feet higher. So that's when we'll see it come off the sides and into the street.
Right.
And then when we have storm surges, right? When we even like again the remnants of hurricanes, where we have another increase on top of that, we have another 3 feet of rise. Then we'll see the water come right over, and that's when we'll see it, as far back as that stop sign.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy because David Diaz is a City Island resident and a board member of the non-profit City Island Rising. One of the organization's objectives is to draw attention to this overlooked issue of flooding in the coastal community.
We've taken well over 1,000 plus pictures now and documented all the flooding, right? Then we would engage with our local electeds to make sure that they were aware of the issues that we're facing here.
That's where Katie Graziano and her team at New York Sea Grant come in. New York Sea Grant is a statewide consortium that promotes environmental sustainability and citizen awareness. One of their citizen scientist programs is called Floodwatch.
We're collecting photos from people in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, and even Manhattan sometimes, to better understand what's happening on the ground. And then while we're building these relationships, we also can help share information that's coming from researchers or that's coming from government officials about what to expect with sea level rise.
Sea level rise is becoming more of an issue in New York City as a whole. The National Weather Service issued its first ever flash flood emergency warning for the city in September of 2021. This rise in sea level is contributing to the sunny day flooding that's affecting the fishing village.
It happens when there's not even a storm event or there's no rain. It's just happening because of sea level rise and because of the fluctuations in high tide.
Currently, City Island's sunny day flooding is limited to the street ends of Ditmars and a few other blocks. Graziano says if it continues unchecked, City Islanders could eventually be left marooned during severe storms.
This is what I would be particularly concerned about if I lived in City Island,
Right.
is that these access points would be flooded every day at the same time.
So these main roads here, right?
Yeah.
So this is City Island Road here, and this is another road here.
Yeah.
And these are the main that's right.
That's the only way in and out of City Island, and those will be flooded every day in the future.
Some experts believe that grim reality is still 20 to 30 years away. Graziano says that one way to avoid that future is by addressing some of the aging infrastructure on the island.
And that's a big thing in City Island, because a lot of the flooding that they're seeing now, it's poor drainage. And so you have to consider not just the water that's coming up from the ocean, you have to also think about how that combines with the rainfall.
It's something Diaz says that his organization is always thinking about as they promote more conversations about climate change and environmental justice.
That's kind of my hope, is that we can get things done here on a community level that people will see and say we can do that too. Like, I want that to be the story.
The Brooklyn Navy Yard's impact on the local economy drew our attention to the area. It's estimated that the 300-acre coastline complex that once launched ships during World War II contributes more than $2 billion, that's billion with a B, to the borough's bottom line. A big part of that is small businesses. Craig Thompson took us inside of Building 77. The once windowless storage facility has had an extensive renovation and is now home to many of these companies.
So we're now actually in production today. So we're brewing our elixir, and this is like an 80-gallon kettle.
Inside the kettle is Annie Basson's namesake brew, Annie's Ginger Elixir, a wellness beverage that's a mix of ginger, berry tea, and other healthy ingredients.
Any kind of inflammatory issue you have in your body, it just is the most powerful natural way of healing inflammation.
Annie moved from home brewing in her kitchen to this 1,000 square foot space, which she moved into in 2018. The company has 4 employees on site, 2 full-time and 2 part-time, and 3 off-site.
And we've scaled it up, from a little pot like this to gallons and gallons every week.
Annie's Ginger Elixir is just one of the more than 500 businesses that call the Brooklyn Navy Yard home. The Navy Yard Development Corporation says these businesses contribute $2.5 billion to the city's economy. Those figures have increased considerably since 2017, when the Navy Yard underwent significant expansion. More than just the city's economy, many of these businesses help the local economy by employing people from the neighborhood.
But we get a lot of people in the neighborhood who come by and inquire, and we've been able to source a lot of our staff from here in Brooklyn, especially in the past year or so.
Rebecca Zaus is Assistant Director of Operations for Russ & Daughters. Russ & Daughters is an iconic family business that's been located on the Lower East Side since 1914. The company opened this counter and bakery in 2019 after Building 77 was renovated.
But we're still serving the traditional smoked salmons, bagels, schmears, spreads that we've been making for generations now.
Zaus says they chose to place their 3rd location here because of the yard's history.
And so the history of the Navy Yard, I think, really was that kind of main aim for us to kind of want to move into this space. It's all about maintaining the traditions of the past while we move into the future, and I think the Brooklyn Navy Yard is a really great example of that, and it really paralleled the same ideals and goals that we had with Russ & Daughters.
History, though, is not the only thing attracting new businesses to the Navy Yard.
So many different businesses. The diversity of the yard is really, really interesting. We meet so many people every week that do all sorts of interesting stuff. So to us, that's super cool.
Transmitter Brewing is a craft brewery on the ground floor, which opened in the newly renovated Building 77 in 2019. It's a small business with only 4 employees, including co-founder Rob Kolb.
We were in Long Island City in about 1,800 square feet, 12-foot ceilings, little garage underneath the Pulaski Bridge, which we outgrew, I think, in the first 6 months. The thing about the Navy Yard is that if you're paying your rent, they don't really kick tenants out. They're all about growing businesses, creating jobs.
Like Annie Basson's company, back on the 10th floor.
Oh, it's the most amazing community for us. They really are very supportive of small businesses, so we participate in the cohort that they offer, and also the interns, who Jessie back here was our former intern, and we've brought her on staff.
And with her elixir now in 800 stores and counting, they might be moving again.
So we already need probably double the space.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Craig Thompson.
We hopped back across the Brooklyn Bridge for this story in Two Bridges. The working class community is just a few blocks south of East Houston Street. The neighborhood is nestled in the shadow of Manhattan Bridge to its north and Brooklyn Bridge to the south. While the name Two Bridges was first applied to the neighborhood in the 1950s, settlement of the area dates back to the 1600s. Vanessa Monet reported on how some early examples of architecture have been preserved for future generations.
The Two Bridges Historic District sits just below East Broadway in the northwestern section of the neighborhood. Of the multitude of buildings located within the district, there are 170 that contribute to the architectural periods between the late 1700s and the 1930s. The district was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2003. Historically, the area was populated with European immigrants, mostly from Ireland and Italy, until the 1950s, when a wave of high-rise developments led to an influx of Latin American and Black residents. There are 5 buildings within the historic district that are individually cataloged on the National Register of Historic Places and listed as New York City landmarks. One of these buildings is the Alfred E. Smith House. Not to be confused with the Governor Alfred E. Smith houses. Those are a NYCHA housing complex comprised of 12 buildings just outside the historic district. The Alfred E. Smith House is a 3-story brick row house constructed in the late 19th century. The landmarked building is named after Al Smith, the 4-term governor of New York, who was first elected in 1918. He was also the Democratic nominee for President of the United States in 1928. Smith was notably the first Roman Catholic to be nominated for president by a major political party. He called the nondescript row house his home from 1907 to 1923. The home went on to become a National Historic Landmark in 1973. Located in the southernmost part of the historic district is Knickerbocker Village. The housing development takes up 2 whole city blocks. The area was once called Lung Block because of the high tuberculosis mortality rate among the 650 families that lived there. The homes were deemed slums and torn down under the slum clearance projects of the 1920s and 30s. Construction of what is now called Knickerbocker Village was completed in 1934. It then became home to white-collar workers in what is considered one of the earliest examples of gentrification in Manhattan. It was one of the first federally subsidized housing complexes in the country. Perhaps one of the most significant sites within the Two Bridges Historic District is not a building at all, but rather a cemetery. Chatham Square Cemetery is known as Sharif Israel's first graveyard, but it is actually the second location used by the congregation. The Chatham Square Cemetery was established in 1682. It remained an active burial site for Sephardic Jews until 1833. It is the second oldest cemetery and oldest remaining Jewish cemetery in New York. It was once much more expansive, but encroaching development, erosion, and eventually eminent domain forced the burial ground to be significantly reduced in size. Hundreds of bodies were moved to other graveyards over the years. The cemetery was added to the National Registry of Historic Places in 1980. Today, only a tiny portion of it remains, with roughly 100 headstones and above-ground tombs visible. For DiverseCITY, I'm Vanessa Monet.
We're bookending the show with another piece from Ozone Park. The New York Times once described the author Jack Kerouac as the area's second most famous former denizen after the crime boss John Gotti. Kerouac was one of the Beat Generation's poster children. The Beat Generation was a group of authors whose unconventional literary style captured the imagination of American youth and set off the counterculture movement of the 1960s. Lenny Falcone is a third-generation native of the area. He's written about this neighborhood and tells us a story about the Wizard of Ozone Park.
I saw something in a local newspaper about Jack Kerouac being here, and I got really curious, so I asked my grandfather, and he recognized the name because every other name in the area at the time was Italian or Irish. And he said, oh yeah, I knew that guy kept his hair so long, and you know, he wanted no break in his pants. I was like, he wanted no break in his pants, and then I thought, yeah, what's a tailor gonna remember? He didn't want a break in his pants. We're standing on the corner of Cross Bay Boulevard and 133rd Street in Ozone Park, and this might be one of the busiest corners that I've stood on in a long time, and the noise is overwhelming. But in Jack Kerouac's time living here, 1943 to 1949, it would have been completely different. It would have been relatively silent. There was a farm up the road. This was a tree-lined boulevard. There were hardly any cars. And Jack sat night after night in his bedroom at that corner, at the desk that he had as a young boy and brought from Lowell, Massachusetts, and he wrote some of the most important works of American literature of all time. So this is the entrance to Jack's family's apartment. Back in the 40s when he lived here, this was a wooden door, it was a French door, and there was a lace curtain on the backside, like all of these buildings had. Next to that door, there was a plaque. The city put this plaque here in about 1996 to commemorate the fact that Kerouac lived here and created some of his work upstairs. But people come for these Kerouac pilgrimages on a pretty regular basis, and they just want to look at the place and they want to touch the brick, and apparently they also want to steal the plaque. This is the bar that Jack Kerouac got his beer from and played piano at in the 40s. At that point in the 40s, it was called the Doxy Tavern. It later was known as McNulty's. When Jack went to the bar just to be, he would sit in the corner, have his drinks, and look out the window at Cross Bay Boulevard, which was a very different boulevard then. It was the perfect place for it in the 40s. It was peaceful. He could collect his thoughts. He could cogitate. There's a lot written about how he wrote it at night. This would have been the quietest place in the world at night. Allen Ginsberg is an iconic American poet. He was a part of the Beat generation, and he and Jack were very close friends. I think he was just tickled by the word ozone in the title of the neighborhood, Ozone Park, and he nicknamed Jack the Wizard of Ozone Park. I'm pretty sure that Jack found inspiration in this neighborhood, but he didn't write about it because his appetite, his palate, was for adventure. And what he found here was ordinary people living everyday lives, helping their children, striving for a better future generationally. But he was exposed to Ozone Park people for 6.5 years. And I can't prove this, but I just know that he soaked in some of those personalities and then recycled them in his work somewhere. To me, Jack Kerouac, kids from Ozone Park, what they have in common are that they're the first generation children of immigrants, or they're even immigrants themselves. And they came here, and it was though American culture was coffee, and they were a percolator. And they filtered American culture through their immigrant background, and they kind of created their own perspective and maybe even their own culture. And I think that Jack did the same thing. He took that French-Canadian upbringing and background, and he filtered Americana through it, and then presented it back to us as the Beat outlook.
Breton, Viking, Irishman, Indian, Mad Boy, doesn't make any difference. There is no doubt about the Beat generation. At least the core of it being a swinging group of new American men intent on joy.
That's our special look back at 2022. For all the good folks who work on this show, I would like to wish you and your family happy holidays. Join us in January when we'll be heading over to East New York in Brooklyn. Till then, take time to explore our diverse city.